Also this morning, we've had news that supermarket giant Woolworths has caved into pressure from dairy farmers vowing to remove its $1 litre fresh milk from its shelves. The supermarket will continue selling 2 and 3 litre varieties of Woolworths branded milk. These will now cost $2.20 and $3.30 respectively, with every cent of the increase going towards dairy farmers. Woolworths says the change is important for the long-term sustainability of the industry and regional communities. Well, joining me now is Agriculture Minister David Littleproud. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, great to be with you, mate.
Talk us through what this change actually is. So at the moment you go into the supermarket, you pay, what, $3 for 3 litres, 2 for 2. Is 1 litre a bit more than $1, I think, but what's actually going to change from the prices you're understanding?
Well, Woolworths doesn't have $1 litre milk, they have 2 and 3.
Right.
The reality was they came out, they showed some leadership in bringing in $2.20 and $3.30 for a drought range. They announced that they'd extend that past the 31st of December, which the other supermarkets didn't. Coles basically cut it off and are only giving the money over now. Aldi, the big German, basically gave everyone the 2-finger salute and said, we're not doing anything. Now Woolworths have reviewed further and said that by the middle of this year, they're going to phase out $1 milk and have that $1 milk brand removed, which is leadership. It's a start, and I thank them for that. There's a lot more that could be done, not just with milk, but across all dairy products, with cheese. And it's the beginning of the end, we hope, of the $1 litre milk. If Coles and Aldi, the big German, muscle up now and do their bit, because effectively we won't have an industry unless they show some leadership. And I say to every Australian, they also vote with their feet. They can stick it right up Coles and the big German and not go anywhere near their shops and go and support retailers that support the dairy industry.
The problem with that is everyone's voted with their feet so far. I think a lot of people are aware of the issues with the dairy industry, and the $1 per litre milk flies off the shelves.
And this is where the Australian consumer has the power. They can show, and in fact, they've shown it on Facebook and all social media in supporting dairy farmers. If just every one of those people that went on and clicked and liked those Facebook posts actually followed through and paid an extra 10 cents, or lo and behold, bought some branded milk, they'd fix this in a heartbeat.
But you say that again, it's just not happening. It seems like it's never going to happen. If there's a cheaper product there, that's what the consumer will pick up. So as for what Woolworths is actually doing here, so you go into the supermarket to Woolworths post June 30, you will see the normal branded milk, various brands. I love the gold with the extra cream in it, I must admit, although I should get that off at some stage. And you'll also see, will it still be a drought range, or just Woolworths milk will be $2.20 or $3.30?
They need to phase in. They brought in a drought product specific. They're going to just transition that into just one range that effectively has this extra 10 cents per litre on it.
And does all of that, if it does all go to the farmer, does that make the industry then viable at this sort of price? Because this is still a hell of a lot cheaper than the branded milk.
Definitely, and what it needs to do is go broader than milk. As my dairy farmers that have got the Woolworths check back to them has said that it's made a difference. Obviously, we're always looking for ways to refine that to get even more into their hip pockets, because that keeps them going. Because the drought isn't just affected those sheep and graziers and cattle producers in Western Queensland and Northern New South Wales. It's also the dairy and pig industry who are intensive feeders. They've got to purchase food for their livestock. So the reality is that the droughts hit them. I'm putting some structural reform through the dairy industry also through a mandatory code of conduct. That pretty well goes from the farm gate to the processor. So that's the other side of it, that we're putting a framework.
And what does that actually change? Because when the ACCC looked into this, the supermarkets had cover via the fact that they said, well, it's all about the processors, even though the ACCC basically said, well, there's a power imbalance there. Yeah. But what is that actually going to change? I mean, this has not been the government doing this. You'd maybe argue it through pressure, but you're relying at the moment on the goodwill of supermarkets.
On the supermarket side, exactly. The ACCC report effectively said the imbalance was between the farm gate and the processor. Now, in theory, I agree with them. In practical application, I don't. I think that there's a missing link with the supermarkets as well. I can only use the tools I've got available, and the tool that I've got is an ACCC report that allows me to look through the dairy code from the farm gate to the processor. I think there's further to go, and that's why Woolworths is showing some leadership without us having to muscle up as a start. But I think there's more that can be done around the grocery code of conduct, which will be a good mechanism. The access to justice piece will be another mechanism.
On the access to justice, so what specifically could happen right now in terms of a small business or a farmer using that? How could they use that legislation to change the outcome?
At the moment, we've got this legislation that we put in some 18 months ago called the effects test, which allows people to test market power of big companies. But it costs too much. It costs somebody, in essence, around $10 to $20 million to test that in a court of law. The reality is what this does is make it cheaper and the ability for someone to test their claims a lot cheaper.
But hasn't the ACCC's effectively looked into this, so that farmer still wouldn't have a case, would they?
Well, you've got
a one-step remove sort of case.
Well, that's why I say, while I respect the ACCC, I think theoretically it was a good report. In practical application, which is what I'm worried about, I don't think they've got the full gist of it, and that's why I think this is a good move. But we need to do more as a government to make sure we put that environment around holding these big multinationals to account.
I guess the bad news, if you like, is for consumers, but I think most people accept it's probably something going up below cost. So.
I think it's about fairness, Tom, and Australians are about fairness. And that's why I think you look at every other agricultural commodity price has gone up because of the drought. Dairy farm, they're still getting the same price. They're locked in. That's not fair. Any Australian would say that's not fair.
I just want to move on briefly to the Darling River. A report today out by scientists. Now, Labor commissioned this, but it's an independent report which talks about, obviously, in part, the recent fish kills, and it blames it on a failure to act resolutely and quickly, insufficient flows as well, threatening the Darling, the fish and the communities. What do you make of this report?
Well, let me firstly put this in perspective. The Academy of Science CEO was a former employee of Bill Shorten. This review didn't go and talk to the water managers at all. In fact, sat around and in essence dreamed up what they wanted to put up on the piece of paper. Let me give them another lesson.
It also includes, though, it also spoke with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, the Land and Water Division in New South Wales, Department of Industry, the New South Wales Office of Environment and Heritage, the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, Queensland Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy, the Commonwealth Environment and Water Office.
Yeah, so...
Are they all compromised too?
No, what I'm suggesting is not far-reaching. That's why I came out and commissioned a proper study predicated off independent science, not by somebody that's tainted by their former employment to create a political wedge. That's all they've tried to do. They've tried to make this a political weapon. When I became the Water Minister, the thing I said was, it's time for leadership, not politics. And Tony Burke took my hand on that, and I've got to say Tony Burke did a good job. The reality is we're working through this study from an independent basis, but let me also say...
Will you look at this study, given all the people...
Of course we will. We look at every study. But let me also say this to you, Tom. The reality is they say there needs more flow in the Darling. Well, let me give you a Year 8 geography lesson. The reality is, unless it rains, there's no water that runs off and runs down the Darling. And I'm in Queensland. We've had no rain. We're dry. And up until 2 months ago, I could walk across the Condamine River in about a dozen places and not even get my boots made.
A lot of the question, though, is when things run dry, depending on how much, the water buybacks and so much how much is flowing through. So are you saying that you believe this was entirely due to lack of rainfall, the recent...
Definitely, and what I'm saying...
No other factor at all?
No. What I'm saying is, yes, rainfall is predominantly the major factor. If there's lessons in how we manage that water, and what you've got to understand, the water that sits out there in Western Queensland and Western New South Wales, there's this thing called evaporation. Again, Mr Shorten will learn that in Year 8 geography as well. And what happens is if they don't use it, it'll evaporate and it'll get no environmental benefit. So the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is not just about putting gigalitres of water down into South Australia. And for every 24 you take out of the Northern Basin, you only get one across the barrages in Adelaide. What it's about is about environmental outcomes up and down the basin, and up and down those ecosystems. And what we saw out of the management of what they did, while they had to make a decision predicated on the evaporation, they also got one of the biggest Murray cod spawnings in our nation's history underneath the Menindee Lakes. So what we've got to do is understand, yes, it's not a perfect science in terms of the management of it. We need to make sure they've got the best tools, and there's always learnings. But to say that that anyone's maliciously done the wrong thing is dangerous and is political, and we don't need that. This is the biggest environmental project in this nation's history, and for the first time in our nation's history, we have agreement from the basin states and the Commonwealth on management of it, and that's what I intend to do, and I know Tony Burke's committed to it as well.